A true horror story. This incident dates back to the early 1990s, when Simon and Lara, an adventurous couple, and their 5-year-old son, Elliot, went camping in the serene and dense forests of Oregon. These forests were famous for their beauty, but among the locals, they were spoken of for another reason. They called them the Whispering Woods, because at night, strange, unintelligible whispers could be heard from them. Local tribes claimed that this forest was home to an ancient witch, named Mahut Kwa, meaning spirit of darkness, who lured lost souls to herself and never let them return. Simon and Lara dismissed these stories and found a spot deep in the forest where there was no sign of human habitation. They wanted to be close to nature, but they had no idea what horrifying reality they were about to face. The first night, everything was fine. They slept under a canopy of stars and woke up to the chirping of birds. Everything began to change on the second night. In the middle of the night, Lara woke up. She felt as if someone was slowly walking outside their tent. She woke Simon, but he didn't hear anything. Lara dismissed it as her imagination and tried to go back to sleep. But then she heard a cold, putrid whisper in her ear, calling her name, right next to her ear. Lara, Lara. The voice was so close that she felt like someone was leaning over her. She closed her eyes in fear. The next morning, Elliot started saying strange things. He said that an auntie came to play with him last night. She wanted to take me with her, Elliot said with a smile. But I told her to let me sleep. Simon and Lara thought it was just a child's imagination, but Lara remembered the whisper from the night before and felt a sense of unease. The third night proved to be the most horrifying. In the middle of the night, Simon and Lara woke up to Elliot's screams. Elliot was trembling with fear, huddled in the corner of the tent. He kept repeating the same thing. "Auntie. She came to me. She was touching my hair." Simon turned on his flashlight and looked around. The tent was the same, but a deep, terrifying cackle could be heard from outside. The sound seemed to come from the depths of the forest, like thousands of hungry birds screaming all at once. That sound chilled them to the bone. Simon and Lara immediately packed up the tent and ran towards the car. In the darkness, but as they were packing the tent, they felt like someone was watching them. The foul smell in the air intensified, and strange whispers could be heard from all directions, as if the trees themselves were talking to them. The whispers would sometimes get louder and sometimes softer, but they had a terrifying repetition. "You shouldn't be here. You'll never go back." When they got into the car and tried to start it, the engine kept dying. They felt as if some unseen force was stopping them. Sarah looked out the windshield and saw a shadow among the trees, a faint outline of an elderly woman. A black shroud was wrapped around her body, and her eyes glowed like embers. As Laura's gaze fell upon it, the shadow moved rapidly towards them, its speed inhuman. Simon finally started the car, and they blindly began to drive out of the forest. They didn't have the courage to look back. When they finally got out of the forest, their clothes were drenched in sweat and dirt, and their faces were pale with fear. After that day, Simon and Lara never went camping again. Elliot had nightmares for years, in which that auntie tried to take him into the forest. The Whispering Woods still exist with their whispers, and even today, locals hesitate to go near them, knowing that Mahut Kwa is waiting in her ancient, terrifying domain for every soul that dares to. Ghost of the Desolate Road. This story dates back to the mid-1980s, when a new, long, and desolate highway was built near the small Texas town of Marfa. This highway stretched for miles through desert and scrubland, with no sign of human life. Locals called it the Howling Highway. because at night, strange screams and cackles could be heard echoing in the air. It was said that a witch resided on this highway, preying on travelers who journeyed alone at night. Mark, a truck driver, dismissed these stories as mere superstitions. He often drove on this highway at night, accustomed to reaching his destinations quickly. One night, he was driving his heavy truck down the highway when suddenly, in his headlights, he saw the shadow of a woman standing in the middle of the road. Mark immediately slammed on the brakes. The woman had long, disheveled hair and wore an old, soiled white dress. Her face was obscured, and she stood perfectly still. Fear gripped Mark for a moment, but then he thought there might have been an accident. He got out of his truck and walked towards the woman. "Ma'am, are you all right?" he asked. The woman didn't respond. As Mark got closer, he saw that the woman's dress was stained with dirt and blood, and her feet were bare. Just as Mark reached out to see her face, the woman lifted her head. Her eyes were empty, deep, and black, like the bottom of a well. A grotesque smile was on her lips, and the skin on her face was torn in places. She wasn't human, she was a terrifying apparition. A scream escaped Mark's lips, and he quickly ran back to his truck. As soon as he opened the truck door, a horrifying, piercing laugh emanated from the woman, spreading through the air. Mark started the truck and tried to speed away. He looked in his rearview mirror, and the woman was running swiftly behind him. Her speed was inhuman. She was running on the highway as if floating on air. Mark pressed the accelerator and increased the truck's speed. The woman suddenly picked up her pace and came right behind the truck. Mark felt his heart jump into his throat. Then he felt a forceful thud on the back of the truck, as if something had slammed into it. He looked in the mirror, and the woman was sitting on the truck's roof, her hair blowing in the wind, and her empty eyes glaring at Mark. She began to claw at the truck's roof with her nails, and the screeching sound of metal echoed inside the truck. Mark had never driven so fast in his life. He swerved the truck sharply around a bend, which made the woman lose her balance, and she fell off the truck's roof. Mark glanced in the mirror for a split second. The woman was lying on the road, but then she sprang up with a jerk and started running towards the truck again. Mark knew he couldn't stop. Now, he kept driving until he saw the lights of a town. He pulled the truck over at a roadside diner and got out. His clothes were soaked with sweat, and his entire body was trembling. When he looked at his truck's roof, there were long, deep scratch marks, as if something had clawed at it with sharp nails. After that night, Mark never traveled on the howling highway at night. He started telling the story of how the ghost of the desolate road almost made him its victim. Even today, people in that part of Texas hesitate to drive on that highway at night, especially alone. They say that in the darkness of the night, if you listen closely, you'll also hear those strange screams and cackles in the air, indicating the presence of the ghost of that desolate road. The Ghost of Illinois. This story dates back to the late 1990s, when Catherine and David, an artist couple, moved to a small, historic town called Hollowcrest in Illinois. They bought an ancient, Gothic-style mansion known as Fenton House. This house was famous not only for its immense beauty but also for its terrifying history. Locals said that the spirit of Lillian, the youngest daughter of the Fenton family, roamed this house. She had mysteriously disappeared in the 1920s and was never found. It was said that Lillian was very attached to her dolls, and she still roamed the house in search of them. Catherine and David dismissed these stories as mere town superstitions, but as soon as they stepped into the house, a strange melancholy and coldness enveloped them. On the very first night, they encountered unusual events. In the middle of the night, they heard faint, melodious sounds from the upper part of the house, like someone singing a lullaby. After that, they heard the patter of small footsteps on the old wooden floor, like a child running. The next day, Catherine found an old trunk in the attic. As she opened the trunk, she smelled dust and decaying wood. Inside, beneath a pile of old clothes, she found a delicate, porcelain doll with deep blue eyes. The doll's hair was cut, and one of its arms was broken. As Catherine picked up the doll, she felt as if someone had taken her hand. For a moment, she felt an intense chill in the room, and then everything returned to normal. That night, Catherine placed the doll on the table near her bed. In the middle of the night, she woke up. She felt as if someone was staring at her. She opened her eyes and saw the doll's eyes glowing. Lillian's doll was now sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at Catherine, with a hidden smile on its face. Terrified, Catherine pulled the blanket over herself. As the days passed, the intensity of the events increased. David was working in his studio when he felt as if someone was standing behind him. He turned around and saw the outline of a girl on his canvas that he hadn't drawn. It was a picture of Lillian that he had never seen. One day, he was looking through the house's old records when he found an old newspaper clipping about the Fenton family, detailing Lillian's disappearance. There was a line in the news that read, "Lillian was deeply attached to her dolls. She was last seen with her favorite doll, which was never found." A cold shiver ran down David's spine when he remembered that the doll was found in the attic. One night, Catherine was in the bathroom when she heard a loud knocking at the door. "David?" she asked, but there was no reply. The knocking grew louder, and then she heard whispers like Lillian's voice from the walls, calling her name. "Catherine, you took my doll. Give me back my doll." A small shadow crept in from under the door. Catherine and David realized they had to leave this house. They locked the doll in a sturdy box and hid it in the deepest corner of the house. But it made no difference. At night, Lillian's voices became even clearer, and they heard the patter of her footsteps near their bed. One day, they started finding small, ancient dolls in every room of the house, even on their own bed, with grotesque smiles on their faces. Finally, Catherine and David decided to leave Fenton House without even selling it. They simply locked it up and never looked back. Even today, the people of Hollowcrest hesitate to go near Fenton House. They say that in the silence of the night, if you pay attention, you will also hear Lillian's lullaby and the patter of her small footsteps as she still roams the rooms of the house in search of her dolls. And if you're truly unlucky, you might find a doll near your pillow, its empty eyes staring at you. Did this story meet your expectations? The Ghost of the Everglades. This story dates back to the early 2000s, when Sarah and Tom, university students, ventured into a remote part of the Florida Everglades for wildlife photography. This area was renowned for its wild beauty and diverse wildlife, but among locals, these swamps were also known for their terrifying secrets. For centuries, tales were told of an ancient witch residing in these swamps, known as the Beholder, an entity that could draw out people's hidden fears with its gaze and then prey on them. Local tribes believed this witch lured souls to herself and never allowed them to leave the swamp. Sarah and Tom, tired of city life, were seeking a place where they could be closer to nature. They set up a camp deep within the swamp, where tree roots emerged from the water, and an eerie silence prevailed everywhere. Little did they know they were stepping into an area where human boundaries ceased to exist. On the first night, they didn't feel anything out of the ordinary, apart from the usual sounds of the swamp. But on the second night, as the sun set and darkness enveloped them, they felt a stirring in the water all around their camp. They assumed it was alligators or other swamp creatures. But soon, they heard a strange, low humming sound emanating from the water. This humming was not human. It was as if a very old, tired spirit was chanting something. On the third night, Tom began to have strange dreams. In his dreams, he saw his past mistakes, his inner fears, and everything he was afraid of. He felt as if something had entered his mind and was hollowing him out from within. He woke up in terror and woke Sarah. "I think there's something here," Tom said, his voice trembling. "I've seen something right before my eyes." Sarah tried to comfort him, thinking it was just a bad dream. But by morning, Sarah also began to feel strange. She constantly felt as if someone was staring at her. While she was taking pictures, she saw a tall shadow behind an old, dead tree. The shadow was human-shaped, but its details were unclear. The shadow stood motionless, watching her. Sarah pulled out her camera, but as soon as she zoomed in, the shadow vanished. That night, fear reached its peak. In the middle of the night, Sarah and Tom heard the same humming together, but now it was coming from right outside their tent. After that, there were loud splashes in the water, as if something large was moving. Then they felt something crawling on the tent wall from the outside. Sarah took out her flashlight and shone it on the tent wall. Nothing was visible, but they felt as if something was breathing right outside the tent. A putrid smell spread through the air. Suddenly, a deep, terrifying laugh came from outside the tent, so loud that their ears began to hurt. There was a malevolence in that laugh that was beyond human comprehension. After that, Tom felt something grab his leg and pull him. He screamed and tried to free himself. Sarah looked and saw that Tom's face was white with fear, and he was trembling badly. They immediately packed up the tent and ran towards their boat. The humming pursued them through the dark waters of the swamp, and they felt eyes staring at them from every tree and bush. When they got into the boat and tried to start it, the engine kept dying. They felt as if some force from within the water was holding them back. Sarah looked into the water and saw a glowing eye in the deep water. A single eye that was very large and yellow, and an ancient, malevolent intelligence gleamed within it. As that eye saw them, the humming intensified, and it was joined by a sound like the shriek of a human in pain. That sound went straight into their hearts, making them feel all their vulnerabilities. Finally, the engine started, and they blindly began to make their way out of the swamp. They didn't have the courage to look back. When they finally emerged from the swamp, their bodies were soaked with sweat, mud, and fear. After that night, Sarah and Tom never set foot in the Florida swamps again. They still tell the story of the entity they called the Beholder, a witch that senses your inner fears and torments you with its gaze. The Everglades still exist, and even today, locals stay away from its deep, desolate parts, knowing that the Beholder is waiting in its ancient domain for its next victim, whom it will terrify with its gaze and whispers and drag into the depths of the swamp forever. Was this story terrifying enough, or would you like to experience a different kind of fear? The Secret of the Quiet Town. This story dates back to the early 1970s, when Silent Falls was a desolate and ancient town, with old houses and thick fog covering everything. In this town stood a sprawling, Victorian-style mansion known as Calendar House. The mansion had been vacant for years, and terrifying stories circulated about it. Locals said that the spirit of Anna, a young girl from the Calendar family, roamed inside. She had mysteriously disappeared with her companion dolls in the late 1890s and was never found. It was said that Anna had an obsessive love for her dolls, and she could still not find peace without them. Sarah and Martin, a young architect couple fed up with city life, were looking for an affordable house in Silent Falls. They found Calendar House, which, despite its dilapidated state, possessed a strange charm. They dismissed the stories as mere town superstitions and bought the house at a low price. On the very first night, they encountered strange occurrences. In the middle of the night, they heard the sounds of small children laughing and whispering from the upper part of the house. After that, they heard the patter of small footsteps on the old wooden floor, as if a child was running through the rooms. Sarah and Martin attributed it to their imagination or the sounds of an old house. The next day, Sarah began cleaning the house. She found a locked room in the attic that looked like a children's room. There was a small cradle and some old, decaying toys. In a corner of the room, she found a glass case containing several porcelain dolls of various sizes. One of these dolls, larger than the others, had deep blue, shining eyes and a sorrowful smile on its face. As Sarah touched the doll, she felt an intense chill in the room, and it felt as if someone had taken her hand. That night, Sarah placed the doll on her bedside table. In the middle of the night, she woke up. She felt as if someone was staring at her. She opened her eyes and saw the doll's eyes glowing. The doll was now facing the bed, its face turned directly towards Sarah. As Sarah moved, she saw the doll's head slowly swaying, as if it was smiling at her. Sarah trembled with fear. As the days passed, the intensity of the events increased. Martin was working in his office when he felt as if someone was behind him. He turned around and found a doll on his desk that he hadn't placed there. It was the same doll found in the attic. Martin picked it up and put it back in the glass case. But the next day, the doll was found again in his office. One night, Sarah was in the bathroom when she heard a loud knocking at the door. "Martin?" she asked, but there was no reply. The knocking grew louder, and then she heard whispers like Anna's voice from the walls, calling her name. "Sarah, you are hiding my dolls. I'll take them back." A small shadow crept in from under the door, and she felt small, cold hands touching her feet. Sarah and Martin realized they had to leave this house. They locked all the dolls in a sturdy metal box and hid it in the deepest corner of the house's basement, sealing it with a brick wall. But it made no difference. At night, Anna's laughter became even clearer, and they heard the patter of her footsteps near their bed. Sometimes, they even found tiny doll marks on their bed. Ultimately, Sarah and Martin were forced to abandon Calendar House without even selling it. They simply locked it up and never returned to Silent Falls. Even today, the people of Silent Falls hesitate to go near Calendar House. They say that in the silence of the night, if you listen closely, you will also hear Anna's laughter and the whispers of her dolls, still roaming the rooms of the house in search of their toys. And sometimes, if you're truly unlucky, an old, blue-eyed doll might be found lying on a desolate road, its eyes staring at you. Was this story terrifying enough?